I have a book. This is called the Encyclopedia of Music. I just think that I haven't read through it. I don't think I've gone through the whole thing and read it like a book. But it talks about the construction of where the instruments came from and how they were constructed and who started what and all that wonderful things. Preface, history of music making in orchestras. Okay, and then you have paintings and stuff. But let me just show you. It's just a beautiful book. It goes. We were talking last week about art, the art side, art history side, and these have images of paintings as well, and musical instruments that they don't necessarily talk about within the arts. But this does bring up musical instruments from around the world. Once again, we start with Egypt and parts of Africa, and I guess they had the harp there. Painted data from about 15th century showing a female musician playing an angular harp, Egypt. So you got instruments in Egypt as well, and I think we did begin the discussion last week on Egypt. So Egypt had built and constructed instruments long before a lot of other cultures came along. There are parts of Africa where drums became, it was a thing, the Khoi son, the Khoi. I have Khoi genetics because my mom is South African and we have a mix of, so we're my family goes into the African context of the history, right? So that's where I stand with cultural understanding of the arts and the music, because it all interconnects, and then Europe as well. And in each, what we're going to go through is we're also going to go through types of sounds you may still find. Let's start with still find on digital audio workstation, and that is what I'm generally composing music with, right? So each of these sounds that you still find in history can still be found in the synthesizers and the computer software. It's not called a software. It's a similar kind of concept as a software, but it's not a software. It's called a digital audio workstation. And before, like I said, before all of this technology came about, we had pieces like the piano and the harpsichord and violins from different parts of the world. Violins were not just found in the West. You find them in India and Asia, like China, Japan. It's not just one country, and that's also the interesting element of music. Is music also was spread from or brought from different parts of the world to the West. And the whole understanding of culture and music plays a role in how the instruments were made, when they came to the West and were implemented into newer types of instruments, like the violin. I'm sure probably came from Asia. I don't think it was necessarily a Western thing or a European thing. They might have seen how it was constructed in Asia. I know Asia definitely had it for a long time. Even the koto in Japan, which is like the Japanese, it's very similar to the Chinese. It's like a Japanese. It's a harp, but it looks like a harp, but it's more like a stringed instrument that sits on the ground and you pluck it. In Japan, you have these little. They look like extra fingers or extra nails that you pluck the actual instrument with. I've always been fascinated with the koto. My parents actually have a koto in their house. So they had brought instruments from different parts of the world, and the koto was one of the pieces or the instruments that they brought back, along with the gamelan from Indonesia. So I wish I did have all the instruments with me, but I do not. Just see if I can use this one. Choose. Okay, let's see if we can find a koto. So I'm going to give you an example of what it sounds like. Let's go into that. So I'll give you different instrumental sounds. Let's start with that. So that's a Japanese koto, and then you have let's go into this. A guruhen. And if you don't know what an encyclopedia is, what we would usually do is, back in the day, you would find the research information by going into the back of the book, and you would directly say, you'd find in alphabetical order, if it is here, Gruhen, guitar. I don't see it in here. Gershwin, glass. Yeah, I don't think all the instruments are in here, so it does not give you a Gruhen. Interesting. So it definitely doesn't give you all the instruments in here. But generally what you would do is you go to the back and use the encyclopedia and find alphabetically the type of thing. Even if, like, not everything is in here. You have composers like Bach. I'm sure they have Chopin. Okay, so they have all sorts of things, but they don't have the specific instruments. And if you go into a DAW has thousands and thousands and thousands of sounds that they use to create these. And in each country, they have a different, so the scale might be different for people in the West versus people in the East versus people in South America versus North America. It's just everything. And here's a scale book. And there are just so many scales. Like, you have minor. That's a C major. And then everything in between. So each country will have its particular sound that they work off of, and then their songs are based off of that format. Recently, obviously, pop music has led people into creating music that's a little bit more like commercial friendly or easy to the Western ear. I don't necessarily think that's like the best approach. I think I have spoken about this in another video. I do think that we are now beginning to take sounds from around the world and put it together into like a new sound, which I think is the most appropriate way to represent countries from the world, because each country has definitely played a big role in how instruments were constructed and where they came from. It's never always talked about. And I think that that is like the missing link here, is they always, when we always talk about music, and obviously if you do music in the world of the bachelors and the masters, you then go into descriptions on who the composers were and their history and all that stuff. I think if you're trying to bridge information together with how music works, these are good examples of books that you could, if you're interested in reading or finding more information, you can bridge these information pieces. So it gives you Ludwig van Beethoven and then his compositions, but at the beginning of each section, when it gives you description on the composer, it gives you a conversation, a biography, a bio of the individual composer and what their history was, just a general outline. It doesn't go in depth into how the composition works and what they perceive as the right way to do things versus the wrong way and who came before them. But I think it gives you the general idea. Like, you can go in and find Handel and then some more information on Handel, right? I'm not here to give you all the information. I think it's important for people to do their own research. Scott Joplin, the entertainer, right? And these are more European and Western approaches. It does not, I do wish we had more information. Like, you have the sitar. We go back into India. The sitar is also like a guitar. This was constructed in India. Jahila Siddiqui? Sitar, large fretted. Yeah, this is good. And I think, you have to remember, instruments were constructed differently. We had a lot of wood and skins back in the day, and we still have. And a lot of the instruments were based off of what was available during the times of construction. So you can see that more of the brass instruments came into play once people had the accessibility to constructing how metals were melted down and constructed. I think I spoke about this in the art section, where a certain time period, metals were then reused and repurposed to create construction of buildings, and that all fits in. It's always split into segments. It should be actually spoken together. So I just want to reinforce that musical instruments worked along with all the other history that had happened through our time periods of the art, the music, the fashion. It was all the spice trade, textile trade. What's less spoken about within the trading sections is more of how the music came about. Where were the music instruments traded from? Were they traded? Were they just reconstructed in a different format? Things and the sounds from different parts of the world were also a big part of how growth in music, for instance, jazz, the rhythms and the blues came from Africa, and the rhythm and the percussions and all of that stuff, people brought over with them from different parts. So it all plays a role. It all plays a role. Reading musical notes is a more of a European approach to things. That's not something people if you're coming from parts of Africa, were necessarily involved with. It was definitely a European add-on to the musical history, right? Musical instruments were constructed from around the world, but I don't think reading music was something normal for the rest of the world. It was more play by ear and understand the sounds and then work together as a team, right? That's like band construction and how instruments were developed with a collective. Not instruments, but yeah, I mean, I think it was teamwork, right? I don't think reading music was something that was an automatic thing. There were different ways to jot down some information. Music production was, I think, a combination of Asia and the West, right? And we have things like recording studios, right? So that's like an orchestra and different types of recording studios. So there are lots of things that are going on here. I think it's the castanet. The castanet is, let me just see if I'm right. It sounds like a duck, 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 duck. It sounds like two pieces of wood tapping each other, but it creates like a movement, and they use that for dance, for Latin dance, right? So yeah, you have to kind of, like, lots of things are needing to be put together here. The whole point of my channel is to bring up these discussions, not a deep in-depth. I mean, I probably could eventually. That would be like a whole master's synopsis, philosophical analysis on the music, the art, and the fashion in one, but that will take me a little bit more research to kind of like put it all together if I were to dive into that more in depth, right? And then we have the things like I said, the harpsichord. So you had the harpsichord before the piano. A castanet's just a percussion instrument that's made out of wood that looks like a horse's hoof, and it does sound like a horse's hoof when you click it, right? But they don't have it on here. I don't know why they don't draw. Yeah, so it all plays a role. Guitars. We all know guitars, but where did guitars really come from originally, right? So that's like, it's like, how were they constructed? Probably India and Asia. These are all the things that were reconstructed. I'm sure somebody probably saw, oh, that's a pretty cool piece. Let's try to recreate that in the West. And I think that's how all the instruments came into being, is like everybody just kind of brought everything together eventually, right? Bells, hammers, glockenspiel, lots of things. So the way percussion works is different from how it's read and played on the piano or the violin or the guitar or the cello or the flute. Some of them are in the treble clef, and some of them are in the bass clef. And for instance, if you're doing percussion is just rhythm. and then it gives you the timing. Like it looks like music notes, but it's more rhythmatic, like it's more rhythm based. So a drummer can understand a pianist pretty well because the way a piano is played is very similar to how the drums would be played, with the beats and all that stuff and the timing. I mean, so is guitar. I mean, all the instruments do in general, but I think if you play drums and you play piano, both hands are being utilized and used. I mean, they all are, but you're seeing two different. I think I don't remember. It's been a long time since I used to play drums, but drums is read a little bit differently. You're dealing with two different sticks, two different hands, right? Yeah. I think, overall, I mean, I'm not gonna music grand scale. The expansion on the smaller instruments led into operas and concerts and uh, performances for Broadway. I mean, it just goes on and on. And then there's so many composers. Kurt Weill, George Gershwin, I mean, Porgy and Bess. And you have the actual performers. So a performer versus a composer is different. I mean, maybe the performer is a composer, but in some cases in classical, the composer is like the person that's doing the orchestras and the performances. Like Mozart was like big into that kind of stuff. He built his songs based off of individual instruments, which is how a composer generally does it. And then the individual uh, instrumentalist or singer or performer would be performing individual parts to that particular larger piece, right? Like, I like to claim myself as the composer versus the performer. I mean, I used to perform, not a lot, but I performed. I've done. Okay, and a composer basically constructs it individually, like layers upon layers. When I do compose something, I try to bring in a different element of a sound from different countries. I don't feel like it's just a Western thing. Because I lived in 5 different countries, I feel like you need to celebrate different countries and bring the different elements into the process of music construction, because music is global, right? It's an international thing. Even though scales and compositions would be played sometimes in different key signatures than people would recognize in like a modern Western perspective of music, right? It's just, you have to respect the cultures. That's like the biggest takeaway from understanding music is global, just like art is global. Like, we tend to forget that um, developing a vision doesn't just come from one idea. Developing a vision comes from a larger picture of a larger scale of things. It's not like we're living on this planet for ourselves. If we are for ourselves, we would be very selfish, right? You want to know, you want to be conscious and aware about the global impacts and the global perspectives on many different things. I mean, thank goodness for social media, because social media opens that door up to understand and explore if we can't travel. Like, I haven't traveled in years. To understand travel and culture through the eyes of people living in those particular areas. Not everybody can afford to travel. Like, everybody talks about, oh, traveling. Well, yeah, if you have really rich parents, maybe, but like, it's not, or if you have a really fantastic job, possibly. But not everybody is lucky to have that experience. I know that when I was younger, I was lucky to have a dad who had a job that allowed us to travel, but it wasn't something I thought twice about, because it was just the lifestyle that I lived. So I got a chance to experience different cultures through living in the spaces. Did I understand a lot of it? I don't know. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But I knew that the connection was that people appreciated me wanting to learn about the cultures. Like, I thought Like, if you're going to go and learn about a country, you learn about the country within the space. You don't just skim the surface. Just like a musical instrument, you don't just skim the surface when you're producing a piece or you're learning a song. You have to learn, like, how it works and the technical side of things and the elements, and maybe even a bit about the composer that you're learning the music from, right? I'm not going to play newer songs like Superman or all of these other things that people would recognize that are modern songs, because I don't want to be flagged for copyright. So that's one of the reasons why I also produce my own music, because I find that you want to stay true to your own, like, your own lifestyle. And when you try to copy, I mean, you can be inspired by other musicians, and you can be influenced. Obviously, we're always influenced by other people, but in other countries, but always stick true to what your capabilities are, right? I don't think it's just a one-sided perspective. It definitely has to be a larger angle. Music production, like, you want to learn music production. There's obviously channels that do that. I mean, I do some of that. I talk about it. I talk about how to build up your own little tiny studio space with what your capabilities are. What can you afford? And even if you need to build your own instrument, you can make your own instruments. It's not impossible. If I had the tools, I could show you how to make them. I mean, I'm not going to make all of them, but you can make small versions of the instruments if you really needed to. So there's always a way around it. If you don't have it, you can make it. Literally, you can make it, because these instruments were already made. They were created by hand. They started off by wood and skins. Therefore, if that was doable, we can still recreate the history by reconstructing it ourselves if we just don't have the capabilities or the means. So that's another element, like reconstruct those visions and ideas. If you don't have this, don't worry about it. Focus on what you can do. This took me a long time to build. This is not even like the newest stuff. This is a very small space. It's not a huge space. It's a very small space. But all of this can be made. This can be reconstructed. These instruments over here, if you analyze it, and I'm sure there are channels that talk about how to make a guitar from, like, I've seen it, how to make a guitar from from an oil can. I've seen it. I've seen people do it. Or how to make a flute out of a bamboo. Or how to create a guitar with shells or seeds from coconuts. I mean, there's so many things you can do with what you might even not know you have. You can do it. It can be done. It is possible. If I can make things out of feathers that I collected over time, then it's absolutely possible that you, as an individual, can create something out of something that you might have lying around the house that you need to recycle anyway. Recycling objects. There's a group that's called Stomp that is famously known to create percussion instruments with recyclable, like, cans and bottles, and they perform it and they're successful. So you don't need the most expensive instrument. You can absolutely 100% create it on your own. There's no need to try to, if you don't have the affordability or the capabilities, make it. Make it. Make it. It's doable. It's all doable. I mean, I have a guitar here that I took apart and I put it back together, but I created a painting on it and I put resin on it. So I know that if you can take an instrument apart, you can absolutely make one from scratch. That's the artistic approach. And when I was studying the arts for the bachelor's, we learned how to use, like, building tools, like circular saws, swords and angle grinders, and blow torches and all those things. So as somebody who likes to build, which I do not have all the equipment, which if I could, I would build my own stuff. Like, I've built furniture in the past. I would definitely show people how to build, like, the basics with things. Maybe I'd do that one day. Maybe I find an oil, like a metal oil can, and I show people how to construct it from cables and wires you can actually have in your space already. Yeah, something to think about. Yeah. So that's the general talk today. I'm not gonna go too much into it, but I just wanted to bring up the question on Western and everywhere else in the world, because it wasn't just the West, it was the whole world. Flutes. Flutes were made out of bamboos. See? And these are different types of, this is a pico pipe, bladder pipe, bladder pipe, olis. Yeah, so yeah, instruments have always been around. The moment people were able to make stuff, things were being developed. It's just another part of the history that is never connected. It's not always connected together, but in this channel, I always connect everything because that's just how I think. I feel as if the world should be connected rather than disconnect in different areas. I'm always about like bringing it together and making sure everybody understands the bigger picture, because that's just what I do. That sounds like a castanet to me. And then back in the day, before you had, like, I go back into the composition of pieces, but before you had loops, right? We had to do everything individually. So we had to imagine ourselves being each individual, like, individual person creating that section of the loop that you could eventually make into loops. So they've now created the loops for us. They've made life even easier. So this whole simplification in music, I always talk about going back to the roots. It's so important to go back to understanding the basics of things, right? You don't want to just, a lot of people think that it's the coolest thing to do, but in all honesty, it's not just about being cool and producing music. It's about understanding behind, like, every successful composer or musician, there's always an understanding of how the music actually works.